Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the public school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the exact same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am so excited for our guest today. I met her a few weeks ago, and I thought she is somebody I want to introduce you to because the information that she has will be very helpful for many of you. So let me introduce Debra Nelson. Debra is committed to educational excellence and compassionate support for students, beginning her journey with a Bachelor of Science in Education. And as a homeschooling mom, she later transitioned into public education, earned an MA in education, and has a wealth of experience and expertise. Since 1991, she's dedicated herself to empowering learners through innovative approaches to literacy that now include private literacy and cognitive therapy. With a vision to inspire and equip students to learn, grow, and thrive through and beyond their struggles, her advocacy for student-centric learning and community support have been a cornerstone of her work. Her diverse background as a former missionary and ESL teacher enriched her cultural competencies and understanding of the complex challenges of twice exceptional learners. Complementary to her role as an educator, Debra is also a passionate neuroscience researcher, exploring the intersections of trauma, health, healing, and education. Her keen interest in relational brain science also informs both her professional endeavors and personal relationships, enriching her work with children struggling with literacy skills. Through her tireless efforts, Debra continues to make a profound impact in her circles of influence, fostering environments where every student can flourish in cultivating their maximum potential as learners and persons. And she also happens to hail from Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is my hometown. Well, it's not my home. It's my current hometown. And she's also the founder of the Education Services Center with a specialty in brain integration therapy. She's a dyslexia specialist and helps children become better readers, more literacy competent, and all of those good things. So Debra, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. And so today our focus will be, I want her to tell her story, but also we're going to talk about some strategies when you have dyslexic learners, when you have children who are struggling with literacy. And we're going to be talking about this a lot over the next few months, just because I feel like it's something, I just recently found out, Debra, that 19% of high school graduates cannot read, and 50% of adults in the United States are reading at less than a 5th grade level. And so I feel like this is such an important topic to discuss with our wonderful parents and grandparents who are raising their beautiful kids. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's start. Enough talking about you in third person. Let's start with, because you started as a homeschool mom, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So talk about that a little bit, and then we'll transition into getting into literacy and what happened there, what led to that transformation.
Sure. So we started with our firstborn. My husband is actually the one that kind of put the bug into the bonnet, so to speak. And he talked to a woman that, was in our church, and she started telling him about it. And I thought, So I went and visited with her. We talked about it a little bit. He was, I think, 3.5 at the time. And so I just ended up latching onto it and really liking it. And I had already actually had it in my mind when I went to college that I would be teaching my children at some point in the future. And so I had my degree in elementary education. I did homeschool my first child. My boys were 4 years apart. And So that kind of made it nice. You could get a good, grounding with the first one before the second one came along, and then the third one. By the time my third one came along, when it was time for him to learn to read, he already was reading. He wasn't necessarily reading, but he knew a lot of the letters and sounds and things that he had picked up, just from hanging around. And I just latched on to teaching reading with my first one. I just loved it. And when I was in college, they didn't teach us how to teach reading. It was interesting. It's like, I want to know how to teach, but they didn't really teach you how to teach. It was all a bunch of theory and pedagogy. You didn't get the pedagogy, you got the theory. So, that was pretty much it. And I homeschooled through, my youngest was an infant. And so my oldest was about 8, and we ended up going to the mission field. And in the mission field, I worked with other missionary kids and taught them as well as my own, and got interested there in the mission field and teaching English as a second language.
Wow.
And so when we came back to the States, we were in the field for about 5-6 years. And when we came back to the States, my oldest was about to go to high school. He was actually 10th grade by our standards, but because he wanted to play sports, he wanted to go to Air Force Academy. He ended up starting in 9th grade so that he could just get their credits and all that. I didn't know, I guess, at the time that I could have created a transcript for him myself and had him enter that way. But nonetheless, it worked out fine. And so he did not go to the Air Force Academy. He ended up going to Embry-Riddle on a scholarship there. But long story short, he didn't actually go to the military, but he did get some pretty distinguished honors and things. My middle one was kind of like your boy that's the musician. Mine's a musician as well. And he was like your oldest, he didn't want to finish school. And so we told him the same thing. Well, fine, if you don't want to finish your school, you still have to get a job then. You're going to have to get work, which he did. He couldn't get his GED until he was 17. But he did do well in business. He's still doing well in business. He worked for Apple for a long time, and now he's working for another company as a software tester.
Wow.
And he did not go to college. My oldest did go to college. He went all the way up to getting his master's and had to do the thesis for the master's, and he just couldn't eke it out. He had been injured. The reason why he wasn't in the military is because he had suffered a brain injury playing baseball. And so he got medical discharge out of Embry-Riddle. And so I think that, impacted him, but he was always like a brain processor. He didn't want to process in writing. He didn't want to write down anything he did in math. He didn't want to write for, in his writing assignments. So I think it was just difficult for him to get his thoughts out on paper. So nonetheless, he's doing well with what he's doing. He's in YouTube like your oldest son as well. And he's all things Tesla and business. So my youngest, we did a dual credit program like you did with one of yours as well. And he graduated from PPCC with his associates in graphic design. And he's still doing graphic design, but he's move out of that with what's happening with AI and everything. I think it's important for him to go ahead and shift out of that. And so he's working on that. And he's a homeschool dad, single dad with 3 kids, and he's homeschooling and working from home.
Wow.
So, that's pretty much my story with that. And when we got back, like I said, to the States, then that was about the time for my oldest to go to college. And when my youngest started at PPCC, I went back to work. And during the time that we were in Oregon, my oldest was in high school. I was a substitute teacher from K to 12 at a school in Bonanza, which is like a rural agricultural area. So I did everything from kindergarten for about 6 months up to ag and chemistry, whatever. They had me in all the different classes. So it was a nice exposure to all those different age groups and, the different subjects and things like that. Of course, I wasn't teaching anything in chemistry. The teacher would just let the kids play cards. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's your choice. Yeah.
Homeschooling
Anyway.
for the win, by the way. right
Homeschool
there.
win, exactly. Homeschool win, absolutely. So it was interesting. I'm working in the public system, but I'm not sending my kids to the public system any more than I have to. My oldest wanted to do that. He felt like that's what he needed to do. He did get a primary nomination, as a result, and he was salutatorian by 1 point. So
Wow.
yeah, it was a good experience for him, but my other two didn't want to do that. And I think, just to put a plug in there, that as parents, I think it's important for us to hear our kids and to respond to what their interests are and try to support whatever that is, whether it's unschooling or public schooling and everything in between.
So what made you decide? Okay, so then you moved into, you were working as a substitute, you were working in the public education system. And then is that the point that you went back to get your master's, or had you already gotten your master's at this
So
point?
when we were in Oregon and I was doing the subbing, I was also, because I had come back with that interest in teaching English as a second language, I heard about a program that would allow you to get a endorsement in teaching English as another language. It was an ESOL, English to speakers of other languages, that they were offering in Oregon, and it was free to get that. They needed more ESL teachers. So I got that endorsement while we were in Oregon, and then we moved back to Colorado. We went from the mission field in East Africa to Oregon for about 7 years, and then we came back to Colorado Springs. And when we got back to the Springs, I started working with the school districts as an interpreter for some refugees that had come from Tanzania that were originally from Burundi, which is one of the countries where we were.
Wow.
And so I worked as a tutor for some of these children. And that was what my initial thing was. And I started applying to the districts. I did some other home-based tutoring as well during that period of time for several of the local districts, District 11 and District 2. And then I applied to District 8 as an ESL teacher, and I got hired. Well, you dig in and you start teaching. I had never been in the public school system other than substituting, right? And I really felt like, even as a homeschool mom, we feel dumb, right? And I did not feel adequate even in the public system. And when I was getting that endorsement, the teacher that was grading my papers, she was like, that's when I really started realizing that I wasn't just quote unquote dumb. My brother was a genius and I was the second born. And so I was always under this radar of, oh my gosh, he's the smart one. I'm not the smart one. Yeah. But, when she, responded to my papers, she always talked about, how they stood out. And, I had perfect score in my endorsement. So still though, when I entered public education, I felt like I was, under the norm of where I needed to be. And still I stepped in and realized I don't have what I need here and I want to get my master's. I found out that there was a master's being offered, so I applied for that as well. And I had so many credits from the endorsement that for the ESOL, I was able to get my master's in it within a year. So I started working for them. I actually got hired late. I started in October, started the master's program in December and had it the next December. And I was so glad that I got that. It did give so much more grounding in my ability to work with kids that, like what, you talked about twice exceptional. A lot of my ESL students were twice exceptional, gifted because they had that dual language processing ability, but yet they may have been struggling in other areas. One of them, it's not necessarily a disability or even a deficit, except the fact that when kids enter kindergarten, they come with 5,000 word average vocabulary. So when you think about a child that comes to English speaking in third, fourth, or fifth grade, how many thousands of words behind they are in the vocabulary that they're required to have access to. So, but I had some very, very interesting students. So that's how I got into that. And I worked as an ESL teacher for 8 out of the years that I worked for the district. I worked for District 8 from 2008 to 2015, went back to Africa for a while. Then I went back to District 8 again in 17 and worked until 2023 last fall or last spring. Yeah.
So at what point did you open the Education Services Center?
So when the district had gone up, through some ups and downs since COVID, and a lot of their funding changed. They got some special funding for 3 years, and I was under that when I went back, I worked half-time until the COVID year, and then I worked as an ESL teacher full-time because they didn't have intervention monies available. So because I was a half-time interventionist, those monies were special funds. And I heard last, spring of 23 that they were not going to have money for my job in the coming year at the same school, that I would have to either change schools or change jobs. And I just decided at this point that my heart was really in helping these kids more, helping these students that needed more support with reading. So I gave it some real consideration. And one day I just came and sat down here in my classroom, which is the lower level of my home, which we had been renting out. I just sat there and looked around and thought, you know what? I could really turn this into a learning center, and I could start doing what I really want to do. And instead of being, you have so many limitations in the public school system. And, one thing that just kind of pushed me over the edge was one of my students. I loved working with her. I'd been working with her for a couple of years, and she needed more intensive intervention. Part of the problem was her attendance. She wasn't regular in attendance. Plus she came in late and she didn't know enough when she entered first grade. But nonetheless, her mom pushed to get her in special education. When she went into special education, she actually got lower services than what she was getting with me as an interventionist.
Wow.
And I was just so frustrated. So now I can do what I want to do. So I said, all right, I'm not going to change schools. I'm not going to change jobs. I'm just going to step out in faith and take the plunge, right? So I did. And I went to the homeschool fair last year in April and just kind of did some feeling out and see if one of the things that was also an impetus at that time was like I said, my youngest son is homeschooling and his oldest is in third grade this year. And he had talked about for several years wanting to homeschool his kids, but taking that in addition to working from home and being a single dad, I suggested that they were in a pretty good school system. Actually, they go to Stratton, and the reading teacher there, their first and second grade teachers were really good teachers. So I said, why not let them stay in to second grade? She'll be a strong reader when she comes out, and then she can do a lot on her own. You can be the guide and the support. And so we figured out a plan for him, and that's what he decided to do. Well, while I'm thinking about that and supporting him and getting back into homeschool, it'd been a lot of years since I'd looked at homeschooling. So it just turned my attention again in that direction. So I decided to see what was going on in the homeschool community. Public school, we're seeing this huge increase in children that are struggling as learners. And what's happening in the homeschool community? Is the same thing happening there? So I went to the homeschool fair to see what I could find out there. And there did seem to be a huge interest. And that just, again, confirmed. And so I stepped out. I left the school district. I went ahead and did summer school, and which I love teaching the literacy clinic with the district. So I did that and started this education center in August.
Very cool. And so, and specifically with the education center, you help with literacy development and then brain integration therapy, which I want to talk about here in a second. Correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
So essentially helping kids to be able to read and comprehend what they're reading. So here's my question, because you had mentioned that you noticed that there was problems. You're seeing problems not only in public school, but in homeschooling with literacy. What do you think is causing that? Or I mean, is it that we've been teaching whole language, which I haven't gone into that with my listeners yet, but we will be going into whole language soon. Is it that there's a lack of phonics being taught? Is it that there's not enough time being taught? What do you think it is that's causing a decline in literacy in children, both in homeschooling and in public schooling?
Well, I think, again, the background of my doing research on the brain and relational science, contrary to what some people believe, most kids don't just learn to read on their own. It's rare for that to happen. And I'm listening to a book now called Unschooling, and she talks about, oh, I just learned to read on my own. Oh, my kids just learned to read on their own. That's fantastic, but a small percentage of students can be expected to do that. And learning to read requires a huge integration of the tracks in the brain that from multiple different areas. And so if there are blocks that occur in that transition network, moving from area to area, you're going to have difficulties. So there are, I don't know, to me, over the last 4 years, we've had a systematic traumatization of society. If you think about all the things that they've done to, the lockdown, the mask wearing, the, usurpation of our freedoms of speech and the economy and so many things. And so that's going to flow downhill to kids from parents. It flows from up above downhill, and the kids are at the bottom of the hill, right? And so I think that's having a huge impact on kids. And I don't know, about the biochemical pieces of it, but I think that there are definitely influences from that arena as well on kids. The diet is going to have an impact on that, the chemical reactions. Some kids are more prone to having difficulties than others. There's a certain thing called tyramine, which is it's a chemical that is in some certain foods. And with that, kids that have autism and other difficulties, it can be because they don't have the monoamine oxidate to break down the tyramine in a lot of foods. And so a lot of processed foods, smoked foods, lunch meats, even some fruits and things like that have high tyramine. And if they don't have that monooxidate, they're not going to be able to break that down, which can, add to some of those difficulties. So I'm not a biochemist. I'm not a doctor, but I just look at all of those things. I watched when my first few years in the district, we had very few kids in our affective needs program. And it just exponentially increased over the years. And I'm not exactly sure why. I was so puzzled by that. It's like, well, is it the vaccines? What's going on? Is there some association with that? Autism was just sky high. So I think that there are a lot of contributors to that increase. I think that the dual working parents, both parents working, kids going to daycare, the diet is going to be more processed foods with mom working than it would be if mom was home preparing, regular kinds of, homemade meals. The stress levels, all of those things I think are impacting all of that. That's my personal take on it. And
thank you.
Yeah, I don't have specific research backing that up, so to speak, where I can give you a list of, well, read this article and this article and this article. But that's what based on my experience and what I've seen, that's what I think.
Gotcha. Based on what your observations have been.
Yes.
Okay. So for parents that are like, okay, I've got a little one that's learning to read, and versus, because I do want to talk about older kids as well, but what would you suggest to start with teaching them to read? And I'm a big advocate of read alouds with the child and reading as much as you possibly can with children. Beyond that, like, what would you like? What, as a reading specialist, as a dyslexia specialist, what can a parent at home do to teach their children to read and comprehend well when they're little?
So the read aloud piece is huge. There's a book, Mem Fox is an author. She wrote a book. What is the name of her book?
It's not The Enchanted Hour, is it?
I don't think it's The Enchanted Hour. I'll try to think of it. She wrote a book, and basically she is a college professor. She has a kindergarten child. The kindergarten child goes to school, and the teacher calls to have a meeting with the mom. Mom's wondering, what on earth? She gets in there, and the teacher asks her, what have you done? Your daughter's already reading. She just entered kindergarten, and she was reading. She said, I didn't do anything except for read aloud to her, sit with her. And as she read, she just goes across the lines on the page. And so she's tracking with each word. So the child is reading along with that. And again, this child may be one that just seems to absorb the instruction more, that doesn't have to have that explicit instruction. and that's okay. And she would ask her questions like, where's this word? Where's that word? And so
Mhm.
she would play games like that with her. And so that's an excellent way to help kids. First of all, that teaches them the concept of print, that as you are speaking, there's an association with print as you're going along on the lines. There's that element of it. Playing games with them, nursery rhymes, teaching phonological awareness is something that we've lost because we don't do nursery rhymes with kids anymore like we used to. So go play the rhyming game with them when they're in the car. Ask them, tell me, you read them a line of something and say, what words did you hear that start with B? What words did you hear that start with just different beginning sounds, end sounds. What words did you hear that start with Can you give me another word or that ends with Give me another word that ends with P, so that they're listening for those sounds. You can do that for each one of the positions, beginning, middle, and end. So beginning sound, middle sound, final sound, and matching those. Then you can start playing games where they're switching them. So your word is bat. Now say bat, but instead of B, say your word is mat. So they're hearing that, then they can swap those out. Do that with middle, beginning, and end as well. So phonological awareness is a huge piece, and talking with your kids. Research shows that kids whose parents speak with them become much better readers than those children who have a low vocabulary in the home.
Oh.
So moms that are under stress, they're working, dad's working, these kids are going to the daycare, their vocabulary level is at their peer level. Their parents come home, they're just trying to get dinner on the table, get the kids bathed, let the kids run off and play while they're trying to take care of reading their email, taking care of bills, cleaning up the house, doing the laundry, whatever. Then there's little conversation going on between kids. We used to have conversations around the dinner table. What did you do today? What did you do? What happened in school? Those kinds of conversations are fewer and fewer now with the busy lifestyles that people have. So actually talking with your kids is a huge element to preparation for reading.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. So what about those who have older kids who, and who struggle, like teenage boys, for example, because I've in the last few weeks, I've talked to a lot of moms with teenage boys who struggle reading. And these are not moms that are coming from poverty. These are moms who are very affluent, whose kids have been in public school, and now they're thinking, well, maybe I need a homeschool. And they have a 16-year-old boy who struggles to read.
Yes.
What would you suggest to those moms or girls? I mean, not just boys, but girls too.
Yes. So I think that there's again the bringing brain integration therapy into the conversation. When we have specific sorts of traumatic events, whether it be sickness or trauma with a certain event that happens, loss of a loved one, or a move or a change of jobs, or having to lose a friend by moving from house to house or whatever. These different things create network communication. Either they can be interruptions, they can actually be blocks, or they can be disconnected. And so all of those things can impact reading. And I think that the video games, that's one of the things that I didn't mention, is having an impact on kids' brains, but video games definitely has an impact on the brain and how it works.
Which I just have to say really quick, we just did our yearly checkups with the pediatrician, and he was like, I wish we could take all screens out of schools, especially video games.
Yes.
Because it's destroying their brains.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think it's interesting that you brought that up. Anyway, keep going.
Yes.
Keep going.
So a lot of the boys that I talk to, one particular boy that I work with, there is a lot of times nothing else that interests them like video games. That's their number one. When I ask them, what do you like to do when and all the boys say that. Even my first graders and second graders, what do you do at home? What do you like to do with your family? I always like to ask that. And they would say, oh, I play video games. I play video games with my dad, especially at Fort Carson. These little first and second graders were playing Call of Duty with their dad. Wow. And so, it's just, to me, so sad, because reading needs to happen, like I said, in an integrated process. But if you're too much in the emotional part of your brain, that's the back part of your brain, more learning is happening more in the frontal part of your brain. And so you need to be able to use all of it, but not just be stuck back in the back part of your brain. So for these moms, what I would suggest is to look for a brain integration therapist if you can get it. If you can't
Mhm.
find someone to do it, look for brain integration exercises. You can find them on the internet. So the brain integration exercises are exercises that are going to cross your midline.
Hmm.
They're going to go, like cross crawl, which is you're doing a march and you're tapping alternate knees.
Hmm.
A lot of yoga exercises are brain integration exercises. I'm not someone that condones yoga. I don't get into any of the spiritual aspect of it, but a lot of the body awareness and the body exercises are good for that. There's one that's called the cross-leg toe touch that integrates so much of the process for reading and writing. And you, instead of just doing where you do a toe touch just straight down, you're actually crossing your legs and kind of locking at the knees. And then you go down, you breathe out as you go down, you hold it for a count of 8, breathe in as you come back up. And so you're crossing your legs, requires a lot of balance to be able to do that. And so it helps to integrate your balance emotionally and physically, and it integrates your reading and writing processes as well.
Okay, so that's so fascinating to me that something so simple can make a difference.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, and that it's all connected, which I'm always baffled going, oh my gosh, everything is always connected,
Yes.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
So, okay, so how would you best describe brain integration therapy? And I'll put some links to some brain integration exercises for people in the show notes.
Good. So before we go there, let me go back to another thing that these moms can do. A lot of times, I don't know how much kids are being taught the structures of language. So when we're reading, there can be the word recognition piece, but then there's the language piece. Do they understand the language? So like I said, I had this one student who can read anything. He's reading at above his grade level, yet he's not comprehending anything that he's reading. So why is that? Is it because he doesn't have the vocabulary, or does he not understand the vocabulary that he's reading? And so what we have to do is dig deeper into that and find out, how is he comprehending what his instruction is that's being given? Does he understand oral directions? Yes, he seems to understand oral directions. All right, well, then the next thing that we go down to is, does he understand the structures of language when it comes to reading and writing? So I would start teaching them the different types of text. So you have informational text, or expository text, and narrative text. What are the different types of expository text? What are the different types of narrative text? What do you look for when you're reading expository text versus what do you look for when you're reading narrative text? Like informational text, you're going to look for facts, right? And that text will look different. It'll have headings, and it'll have, maybe some underlying vocabulary, and maybe some photos with some labels on it, versus narrative text is going to have a beginning, middle, and end. It's going to have a problem and a solution, those types of things. So, and then being able to write to those kinds of texts and answer questions to those kinds of texts, looking for author's purpose. Those are all things that are needed. So if moms are homeschooling, those are the kinds of things you want to look for in the curriculum or in any materials that you choose to select to work with your students in. And that will help you to teach them the comprehension strategies that they need before they even start. Set a purpose before you read, then follow that purpose, and then check that purpose after you're finished, and then write to that purpose ask them to write their own questions. If you're the teacher, what would you want to know? What questions would you want to ask so that you know that your student understood this text? And that really gets them thinking critically about what they're reading.
Does having them narrate back what they've read help?
It does, because interestingly, the Dibbles test that they give in public school for evaluating students' comprehension, they've done away with the retell. That used to be called the retell. So they've done away with that now. And so they've shown that doesn't necessarily give good indicators. The number of words they did and the quality of the retell, they did away with that. And they just were implementing a new Dibbles this year. So I didn't get to get on the training last year to find out what all they were doing to change that. So recount is part of being able to write. So you can write about a specific event, and teaching about what does a recount look like. How do you do that? How do you plan it? And those kinds of things. That would be the next piece, would be the writing pieces. There are different types of writing that coincide with the different types of text. And so you can read text and analyze the text. Now you can write that same type of differentiated text. You're going to write an informational text, that's factual description. You're going to write a personal description. You might write an imaginative story. You might write a recount that's, again, factual. And, what the qualities of those look like. So, I just wanted to cover that with you before we go to brain integration. You ready to talk about that now?
Let's go. Yep. Let's go into brain integration.
Okay. So, there are so many different ways that dyslexia manifests. And they say that there are no two dyslexics alike, because there are different ways that it can manifest, whether it be the auditory processing, whether it be the visual processing. And sometimes there's a disconnect between the eye-hand, and sometimes there's a disconnect between the eye and the mouth, and sometimes between the eye and the ear. Sometimes it can be between the right ear and the left ear. And, it can be, is their right eye dominant or their left eye dominant? Are they left-handed and also left-eyed? So if there's they call it mixed dominance. So if you, just like you were talking about the right-left earlier, if you have a left brain dominance, you want the dominance of your hand and your eye and your ear and your foot to be on the right side, so that you can be, there is that cross communication and that mirroring going on. So what brain integration does is it helps to integrate the processes that are needed for all function that we have, from left to right, top to bottom, and front to back, so that you are getting that communication that's just open networks, no interruptions in there. And I use a protocol that is that multidimensional like that. It's also multimodal. We use acupoints with a little sparker that just completes a circuit for that, to stimulate that completed circuit with verbal affirmations and visual IQs. And then the physical activity that I mentioned to you about the different exercises.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So for a mom who's got a child with dyslexia, you would recommend getting them brain integration therapy to help? Would working with a literacy specialist help? Or as a mom, could they, or dad or grandma or grandpa, could they, what would they need to do, like on a daily basis, to help the child with overcome? Well, I guess you don't overcome it necessarily.
You
but
can, depending on when you begin
you?
the intervention. Yes. So the earlier you get intervention, the better it's going to be. The longer you wait, the harder it is, which is one of the things that frustrates me about the programs that, encourage waiting to teach your child to read until, they're 8 or 9 years old. That's great, as long as there isn't some sort of difficulty like that, because the longer they wait, the more those patterns are ingrained in their, and the harder they are to overcome, in my experience. So, the best thing for them to do, I would say, if you have someone that you suspect is dyslexic, is go online and look at what the specific symptoms are, see how many of them you think, there is. I don't necessarily feel like homeschool parents need to have a diagnosis, but if you would like to have a diagnosis so that you can see where the specific areas of strength and specific areas of weakness are, it is helpful. But some of them can be very, very expensive. I don't charge a lot for mine. I just give a regular baseline reading evaluation, and I can tell, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not diagnosing dyslexia, but I can tell, they're struggling here with auditory processing. They're struggling here with orthographic processing. And the auditory processing just means how the language is taken in and how the language is produced. And so where do they struggle? I have some students that, they just can't seem to get it out correctly. No matter how much they try, they just get tongue-tied. They just get all twisted up in there. But if they read silently, it's not necessarily that much easier. And some of them, when they read silently, it's fine. It's no problem. So just if they have access to someone, they want an evaluation, yes, go get an evaluation. Look on the internet and see what kinds of information on there that you can find. I like to tell my parents that it is an artful, very masterful skill for struggling readers to read it all. I mean, those with dyslexia, it's so tiring. It takes so much energy for them. It takes longer. The path to reading is much longer, and there are lots of delays. Some students also process differently. Some have fast processing. And so they're going to come across with, like I have this one, I've had students that just, they're always saying the wrong vowel sound. No matter what, how many times you drill, their brain just processes so fast that they're getting the wrong vowel sound. They see it one way, but they process it a different way, and they say it differently. And then they have other ones that they're slow in processing and very deliberate in processing, but they're so slow. It's so laborious for them, right? And so, you've got those two extremes, and then what's going on in between. And that would be more the orthographic, where they're mapping the sound and the letter in their brain. So they're seeing it, they're connecting it in their brain to the sound, and then they have to articulate it. And so in that circuit there that they're having to take, they have some interruptions that makes it slower. So I think understanding as a parent that it's very laborious for these kids. They're not trying to be difficult. Kids want to learn. They're not if they're avoidant, it's because it's hard. And it's hard. If it's hard for them, then there's something there that they need support with. It's not just, my kid's stubborn, he doesn't want to learn to read. Most of the time, it's not that. I would say it'd be very rare. Kids want to learn. They want to be, they're inquisitive. They're, when you make it fun for them, I just got a new client, and they've been doing one certain thing for a while now. I won't say how long. And they haven't seen the results, and the child hates it. And I said, just don't continue if they hate it.
Yeah.
It's not, just don't do that. Find something else that, just keep trying until you find what works and that is encouraging for them. So I would say that's definitely a please don't do that. Don't torture your children through education, because it's just going to, it's going to dampen their desire. And find something that works. So All About Reading, if they're homeschooling, is a good program.
All About Reading.
It's a multimodal, multisensory program. I would not recommend Barton myself. I know a lot of people use Barton. I would not recommend it. It's very dull, and a lot of children that are dyslexic are twice exceptional, so they're gifted. Gifted kids hate the repetition, and it's just so boring.
Yeah, got a couple like that.
You know that?
I said I've got a couple like that.
Yeah. So I love Orton Gillingham based programs, and All About Reading is an Orton Gillingham program. I'm using IMSE, and if a parent has the means and they want to, they can go to training. They can go to Orton Gillingham training at the Institute for Multisensory Education, and they can become certified, and they can get all the materials and begin teaching their own children. I think you can even buy the materials on their site, but without the training, may not have the same impact. So the program that I use is the IMSE program, and I have their materials. I was also trained in LETRS, which is language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, and it teaches the science of reading and a lot of different strategies that you can use. And it teaches you assessment protocols for how you can assess. That's what I use to assess my students for where they're struggling and where their strengths are. And then they give you the processes for, all right, what am I going to do with this? You got this information. Now, what do you do with the data? And that was something that came with a lot of practice as an educator. I've got the data. Now, what does that mean? And what am I supposed to do with it to help these students? Did I answer that question?
I think so. When a parent sees that their child really is struggling, and they can see that they're exhausted in the reading, and they can see that this is more laborious than it ought to be.
Yes.
Then it might be helpful for them to get a reading program, do some brain integration. Is that the best course of action, do you feel like, for parents?
So I think that for some parents, I have one client that, in particular, that no matter what she tried, it was just impossible. So you may need the intervention of someone that knows what to do for a child like that, that they just can't even look at letters without having a meltdown. It's just so much of a struggle. So depending on where the child is in the dyslexia continuum, Some kids, they might have some minor dyslexic characteristics, and others, it's severe. And not only do they see letters flipping this way, they see letters flipping this way. They jump from the beginning of the word to the end of the word and the end of the word to the beginning of the word. And they have to study it so hard and for so long to get it to even, come into clarity for them. And when that happens, then you do need somebody that's been trained in how to help them to map that step by step by step. I think the biggest problem for dyslexics like that are on that spectrum is being overloaded with too much information at the same time. They have to be slow. I even had one student I tried, with him I normally do one letter at a time when I'm teaching a concept, but I still try to teach all the letters of the alphabet in a song that we do that's called the zoophonics song. And even that was too much for him. I had to back down. So having an expert that knows, all right, this is overload, we need to back off. And even as a parent, if you're discerning and intuitive, you can kind of pick up on that. But I think reach out if you need help to your homeschool community, Facebook groups, whatever, different Facebook groups, and find out in your area, what are you guys doing? I have this child, da, 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 da. If you can't get anyone locally that's a reading specialist, because I know you have some internationally, and I don't know what availability is on an international level, but that's what I would recommend. If you can't find anybody on a local basis, then just reach out on the internet and see what you can find. All About Reading, like I said, is one I would recommend. I use Sing, Spell, Read, and Write for my kids way back when, and it's still available. And it uses a lot of songs and a lot of motivation. They code the words for spelling purposes, and they teach the high frequency words, spelling them. There's a lot of games, which helps to get them from the left side to right side. So left brain is where we take in the information, and then where you stick it on the right side requires connecting dots, doing fun things with color, movement, art, those kinds of things to help to stick it in long-term memory. So Sing, Spell, Read, and Write does some of that.
So let's talk just for a second as we're wrapping up. What are some of the signs? Because you mentioned earlier, like that there's definitely signs of dyslexia. What are some of those signs? So a parent can be aware and that be on the radar.
Yes. I would say the first thing that you're going to encounter is that they have a difficulty, like if they had ear infections, a lot of ear infections when they were young, or any sort of auditory, like speech or something like that, that's going to come into play when it comes to reading. They're going to encounter difficulties more than likely, not always, but sometimes, because I have had students that had speech issues, but they were perfect readers. So it's not always going to be the case, but these are just things that you want to watch out for and see. One of the two, I would say the most glaring for me, are children that have difficulty learning the names of letters or the sounds of letters and keeping them consistent. Like they might have it one day and they don't have it the next, or they can read a word one time and then it's on the same page, but they have to sound it out again. They can't remember that word. High frequency words, learning words, like there are 2,000 high frequency words that it's called the Fry word list. And if you know those 2,000 words, you can typically read 60% of what's out there. And children that struggle with dyslexia, the more they struggle, the more difficulty they have with those words. They have like learning the word the, with, is, of, even and, just some that you can sound out. If they just are kind of words that are stuck in there that may or may not have a quote unquote meaning, then it's more difficult for them. They have a hard time with nonsense words because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. If a parent wants to practice reading with their kids, and we had talked about this before off air, websites that they could go to, ideas that they could have, and we talked about this when I was on the phone with you a few weeks ago. What would you suggest so that they can help their kids practice with literacy?
Yeah, so I have, and I could send that link to you.
And I'll put this in the show notes for those of y'all listening, so you can go in, look at the show notes, pull up the links, and
So
start
there
helping
are a
your
couple
kids.
of really good sites that I really like, depending on what the level is. So if they're just beginning to learn, KahnKids, KAHN, KahnKids is fun. Starfall.com is good. Those are just for the beginners. And I would say that would take him like through, kindergarten level, maybe early first. Those two. And then I should have that list ready for you. I made a list for parents for learning the high frequency words. There is a really good online site. It's called Time for Learning, TIME, 4 learning.com. And they have a hybrid program where you can just do all online classes, or you can do a mixture of online and paper classes. And that you can have specific grade levels. Like, let's say your child is at fourth grade in math, but they're at second grade in reading. You can pick separate grade levels for each one of the subjects that you do. They do the core subjects reading. So they do ELA and math and science. And I think they might do social studies. So it's a nice core place to go. And it's adaptable to students that have learning difficulties, including autism. So it's a good place to go. They do charge a fee, the Time for Learning. I believe I was just talking with another client of mine about it. I think it's $300. It ended up being about $300 for the school year, but it's a monthly thing. I think it's like $15 a month or something like that. Yeah.
And then you had mentioned,
or 30, maybe it was 30.
When we had spoken before about a Florida website.
Oh, yes. Florida Center for Reading Research. Florida Center for Reading Research has a lot, everything that you need. So they have pre-K, grades 2 to 3, and grades 4 or 5. So everything for elementary, and everything from phonemic awareness, which is just, the playing games with like the rhyming, first sound, last sound, and then segmenting and blending words. Up to vocabulary development, adding affixes like prefixes and suffixes, word fluency, reading comprehension, everything from the gamut. And you as a parent can go on there. Let me see. I'll give you the track.
Perfect. And for those listening, I will put all the links in the show notes so that y'all have these and you can access all of this stuff. Now, the Florida Center for Reading Research, is that a subscription based, or is that free?
It's free. It's all free.
That's fantastic.
And so you can go to, let's see, is it the resource database? Nope. I believe, let's see, for educators, for communities. Oh, yes. Okay. It's called, the tab is fStarun, Student Center Activities. And then it's under the left margin. The menu is pre-kinder, kinder and first grade, second and third grade, fourth and fifth grade. And so you just click each one of those different grade levels that are appropriate for you. And they have them categorized. And it's overwhelming probably to someone who's not a teacher, but they have it based on the 5 components of reading, or the elements of reading. So it'll be under phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. Those two go together. Phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So it's based on those categories. And then you can just click any of those activities. You can print them off. They're in PDF form. You can print them off. You can laminate them and just do fun activities with your kids through that. Yeah.
I love that.
Great.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, last thoughts for all these moms and grandmas and grandpas and dads out there. What advice would you give them as they're homeschooling?
So homeschooling, go with your gut. I'm just going to, I think you and I talked about this the first time we had our conversation, that no matter how long we've been doing it, we still feel like, oh, I'm just not doing a good job. I still feel like that sometimes. I get on myself. It's like, oh, I need to be doing better with this, or I need to be doing better with that. It's all about the learning, right? We teach our kids that life is a lifelong learning experience. And so if we can just learn to ride along with our kids and let them know that we don't know everything here, but we're going to learn about it together, and draw on them, let them be a teacher to you as much as you are, a teacher for them. They taught us in school that, education is drawing out, not necessarily pouring in. And so I think that we need to keep that exchange going back and forth between us. That would be one of the relational things, right? That we all have something to give, and we all need each other. So just as parents need the kids need the parents. And the other advice I would give is enjoy the process. Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
Debra, thank you so much for taking the time today and coming on. Debra's website, I will have a link at the bottom as well as in the show notes, as well as all of the other websites that we've talked about today. Parents, you got this. You're doing better than you think you are. Yes. Grandmas, grandpas, not forgetting you guys that are raising your grandkids. Mamas and dads, grandmas, grandpas, you got this. We'll talk next week. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool, or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.